Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here, everyone. And Veronica, my team member, and I are here. She's helping me behind the scenes from many miles away. But thank you. I even see in the chat that somebody attended my mass conference for women talk. That's so great. So you probably will hear some similar stuff today. But yes, I just spoke at virtually at the the big conference for women that they do 4 of them around the country, and also did a Q&A, which was amazing. So thank you for letting me know that you were there. It was really special. So yes, I have been in this work for a really long time. I think it's almost 2 decades, believe it or not, before DEI really took off a couple of years ago. And I hope today's presentation will give you some insights into the world that I exist in, that I'm trying to decode and define for leaders, particularly the many leaders that I work with at the top of organizations. I work with a lot of executive teams. But I also, know well the emerging workforce too. And so I'll share some insights as I can with, overall, what is going on in the workforce and workplace right now? What is the work ahead? What are some important things to focus on around inclusive leadership and allyship and belonging? And I hope it's helpful. And I'm going to save a nice juicy chunk of time for questions like Tammy just indicated. So please don't hesitate to send them in as we go, and we will grab them. And if I happen to see them, I will address them too. In real time, if they are pertinent to what we're talking about. So please don't hesitate, and don't wait necessarily for Q&A. If you'd like to keep them coming, I'll keep an eye out. So my QR code is on the bottom right. That is all things Jennifer Brown Consulting, books, podcast, inclusive leader assessment, information on our consulting services, in case any of you are interfacing with corporate clients and working either individually or with the org or with teams. We've got a lot of really good stuff, and primarily Jennifer Brown Consulting does organizational DEI consulting. So strategy, training, executive learning, manager training, and also ERG consulting and development. So we are sort of a full service shop when it comes to DEI. So I just wanted to let you all know that is our specialty. And if you'd like to know more, please reach out to us. So I think I'm going to get started right now. And I always start with my personal stories. I believe everybody has a diversity story, or stories plural, some of which is often not visible about us. And that is true for me, for sure. And I'll get to that in a second. But I came to New York City to be an opera singer. I got to study opera and got my master's in vocal performance. But unfortunately, through the course of operatic training, I injured my voice. And I had to get several vocal surgeries, sadly, to fix what had happened. And the aftermath of surgery is total silence, followed by, very gentle rehabilitation. And you don't really recognize your voice for a while as it comes back and it sinks back into, your normal register. But, this, after a couple times of this, I was very, having to be realistic that I wouldn't be able to sing for a living. It just would not, support me, my instrument. And heartbroken and confused, of course, I knew I had to reinvent. And luckily, I ended up trading one stage for another in hindsight. So I was on the performance stage, and then I ended up going into HR, and specifically training and development, because somebody had said to me, you'd really like being a trainer, I think. And I didn't know what that was, but you all know what that is, of course, given what you do. And I ended up getting a second master's degree in organizational development and leadership at Fordham University, and just falling in love with the work of human potential and systems change and organizational design and all things leadership and learning. And I would subsequently then graduate from that, have some HR roles internally, and then go out on my own, as I said, nearly 20 years ago, hang out my shingle, and become a consulting firm. And today we get to work across the Fortune 1000, doing this amazing work that we do. So I like to say I was meant to use my voice, just not as a singer. But the other way that I learned that I needed to use my voice, but where I struggled, was I'm a member of the LGBTQ plus community. So have been out since I was in my early 20s, but closeted as a performer because I didn't see anyone that I thought shared my story. And then as a corporate person in HR and training development, I certainly was closeted in a series of corporate roles, because many of us are still closeted, and this is true to this day. And then finally, I was an entrepreneur and I could become woman-owned certified and LGBTQ-owned certified and be very proud around our diverse supplier designations. But it has been a journey. And I share that because it still occurs to me, my own experience of belonging in different rooms, now virtual, but I'm still acutely aware of my difference that may impact my power, my influence, my authority in a room. And the name for this came to me through the work of Kenji Yoshino, who wrote a book called Covering, which I highly recommend. He's a constitutional law professor at NYU, but he's also a gay Asian, a cisgender man, a parent, um, an adoptive parent. So his diversity story, unspools from there. But he coined this term covering, and it means what we do in anticipation of bias. And it really resonated with me because I still feel, and for years, I've experienced those decisions that we make around not bringing our full self into a given situation and making these decisions to downplay or minimize or not talk about, right? So people may know how we identify, but there's a subtlety here around leaving it out of the conversation strategically so that we don't get the microaggressions, we don't get the stereotyping. We think we're avoiding successfully and not sometimes the reaction that happens and the biases that are triggered maybe in others about who we are. And so we think we're managing our psychological safety this way, but it does extol a price. It takes from us because, doing this takes time, energy, it distracts us. And it also ultimately, I think, has the impact of minimizing our sense of ourself. And in their research on Covering that he did with Christy Smith, indeed, it says it has an impact on our confidence, right? And in our fullness of showing up. So I became really intrigued by this, and I teach it now every single time I give a presentation. And if somebody's off mute, by the way, could I just ask if you check your microphone and make sure? Oh, thank you so much. That's better. Thanks. So they found in their report they did with Deloitte that 61% report covering along one axis, whether it's our appearance or who we're seen, being in a cohort with, affiliation-based covering, whether it's advocacy-based covering, meaning like I don't, challenge a joke or a comment, and because I'm afraid of how it's going to blow back to me. And so we all do this. We all know what this is like. And unfortunately, we've gotten really good at it too, which is not so great. So what's interesting in the study is, and not surprising to me, is that, multiple identities report covering on a regular basis. And the ones that are higher than the average in the sample size, which the average was 61%, you might remember from the last slide, are those of us who are underrepresented in the workplace. So, and some of us carry multiple stigmatized identities, and that is what we would call intersectionality. But these numbers are high, right? We just look at LGBTQ. I just shared that so many of us are still closeted in the workplace. Nearly 50% of us are closeted professionally. And that's a number from 2019. And so I don't know how the pandemic and working virtually in hybrid workplaces have affected that. I'm not sure. That data hasn't been captured, but I would imagine I'm not sure it's really changed things. We'll see. But so these are some high numbers. This is a lot of exhaustion when we talk about the fatigue of being in workplaces that were not built by and for so many of us and so many of our identities to work for us and to be optimized for us. Many of us are on the outside kind of struggling to, understand the unwritten rules, right? And with those microaggressions and stereotypes, and particularly if we have visible and invisible aspects of who we are, and we've got intersectional multiple identities, when we come into situations where we're constantly putting energy towards, what part of my identity is going to trigger what, and how am I going to mitigate this ahead of time? I mean, that's what it feels like to me. And so then, and how am I going to overcome this in order to have the authority and the power that I need to accomplish my job and, what I do every day. So thinking about this, then there's another group that reports covering, perhaps not in such high levels, but it's not insignificant. The sample included straight white men, as it should, as all of our research should, and our work should, and our work certainly does at JBC. But 45% of the straight white male respondents talked about perhaps, invisible diversity dimensions, things that are not apparent. But diversity dimensions none the same: religious differences, political affiliation, socioeconomic background, disabilities, how addiction has impacted our lives and our loved ones, caregiving, being a single or divorced parent, being a grandparent, parenting small children, many different things that have been shared with me that humble me and remind me that everyone knows something about diversity. And also that my job, walking into a room or beaming into a room that might look like this, my work is to not stereotype this room, to not assume that what I see is the whole story, not assume that people might be competent or incompetent at allyship. And that my job is to really create a safe container for people to share more of what's under that waterline, which I'll get to in a moment, so that we can have a more truthful conversation. And then if these folks are in leadership positions, even more important that they identify their diversity story or stories and bring that up to the surface, right? Lead from that place. Because now is a time more than ever when these next generations want and expect transparency. They want to see the whole person, warts and all. They want to see, the honesty, the truth, the transparency. They don't want to necessarily, and they can't connect as well, nor can any of us connect with that sanitized version of a leader that has become, the norm, right? The rewarded, compensated, promoted version of what a leader looks like and acts like and what they talk about. So it's a really, really wonderful experience to be in a room like this and do that digging and that work. And there's a lot of fear in a room like this too, which we'll get to later. And if you'd like to ask some questions about it, I'd love to entertain them, because there's a lot of competency building that's needed here with this demographic and this generation in general, which I share. That generation of leadership too, we got really different messages about diversity, equity, and inclusion as we were coming of age, and then building our leadership toolkit. So there's a lot of revisiting that we need to do, and we have needed to do for a long time. So I think of then, if everybody has a diversity story and so much is invisible, I think of it like an iceberg, where we've got the sanitized version or the normed version and parts of us that we feel are safe to conform to, for example. And then there's so many pieces under the waterline that we are afraid to divulge. And when we say, we hear the slogan, bring your full self to work, it's all fine and good. But for some of us, bringing our full self to work is relatively more risky. I bring my true gender identity to work, right? My pronouns are she, her, hers. So I identify as cisgender. So it's much more straightforward for me to be bringing my full self to work from a gender identity perspective than it might be for my colleagues who identify as gender non-binary or perhaps different pronouns than what meets the eye. So, and I could spend hours on this slide, as you can imagine. We're constantly adding things to it and getting feedback and chat from people. And it's just so important because so much has been not articulated in the organizational context because of fear and consequences, perceived or real, doesn't matter, perception is reality, that when we lower our waterline, it is risky. And yet what we need for cultures of belonging where everyone can thrive is we need to not be putting a ton of invaluable energy towards managing our own psychological safety and ideas and our identities. We need to be focusing on creativity and innovation, but we can't be as creative as we can be if we are navigating the fear of being stereotyped and microaggressed or macroaggressed. And so we have this sort of fundamental, conundrum here that we all need to commit to lowering the waterline and be getting comfortable being uncomfortable. But that includes leadership too. That includes all identities and all generations. And I think, like I said earlier, some generations struggle more with this because it's a new way of leading. And what I like to say is to them, and you might want to steal this, is what got you here won't get you there, to quote Marshall Goldsmith, right? The transition we're going through is a wholesale reinvention of leadership. It is to me bringing forward things about ourselves and things we don't have the answers to, we don't know how to navigate, and talking about that. And that is very powerful. It's a powerful way to connect with people, particularly younger workforce members. And so the challenge with this iceberg is to, for me to ask all of you and to think about your coaching clients. What do their icebergs look like? How comfortable are they bringing things above the waterline? How comfortable are we leading from that place of transparency and vulnerability and truth? and being vulnerable around, the things that have shaped who we are, and coming from that place. And I tell people, and they don't believe me until they actually do it and they receive the response from people, the unlock that happens, particularly for leaders who are watched very carefully because they're viewed as a weather vane for what is acceptable, what is done here, what is said here, how honest are people here. They're in a very powerful position. Many eyes are on them, and and you all know this because you work with leaders. So what they do really matters, and it trickles down. So we can't just have those of us who are relatively more carrying more stigmatized identities do most of the work of bringing our identities above the waterline. It has to be a mutual endeavor, and we need to join hands and do it together. And that's what shifts cultures ultimately. And so, I do want to share a bit about the other topic that comes up a lot, which is privilege. And in order to get into that topic, I want to define, intersectionality again, that sort of overlapping impact of stigmatized identities, coined by Kimberly Crenshaw decades ago, right? You might be hearing her name in all the CRT conversations, which she teaches as a law professor, but she is brilliant. And this concept helped me understand, for example, that as a cisgender woman, there were lots of women of different identities that are experiencing being female through the lens of also being Black, through the lens of being LGBTQ, for the lens of being Latinx, or having a disability. Though that's intersectionality, because we may be in the same storm as women, but we are riding it out in different boats. And the intersectional lens develops the ability and the discipline to look at somebody and assume intersectionality because there's so much we can't see, and also and really dive into it in terms of how we support someone. We can support white women and Black women, for example, similarly, but we also need to support them differently because we're riding the storm out in different boats, right? So as a coach, as a partner, as a mentor, as a colleague, this is what we have to perceive these differences, and we need to name them. These differences matter. I grew up in a generation, and maybe some of you can relate, where we were told to say and believe, I don't see color. Now differences need to be seen, and they need to be acknowledged, and they need to be celebrated, yes, but they also need to inform how we approach supporting people, because we are experiencing different realities as women. And I'm just using women as an example. Very important. So as we educate ourselves about different experiences that aren't our own, this is the lens that we can bring to, our coaching, to our relationships. And so a word about privilege then, I think of the puzzle pieces that I have on the slide for myself. I am a blend of, intersectional identities, female, LGBTQ, right? And the interplay between those things, one of which is visible and one of which is not. But I also am so aware of the privileges that I bring to every interaction and every step I take in this world, basically. And it's not just white and male privilege, which it's been this concept has been housed there, and I don't think it's been helpful. And actually, it's probably pushed a lot of people away that could be contributing, which I think is a loss because this work needs all of us. But I think of my own story of the way I was raised with tremendous socioeconomic advantage, where I never wanted for food, shelter, stable home life. I had plenty of books to read. I was encouraged to think about, that I could be anything I wanted to be. And I think of these as the tailwinds that have sped me along in life. And so, as an LGBTQ person, I can have privileges that I need to enact in order to create a more equitable world. And I can be both. I can be many, many things. And I would challenge all of us, and I do challenge all of us, to think about the privileges we have. And I want to define them as beyond just identity-based. Sometimes they are our position in organizations. Sometimes they are our tenure. Sometimes I can open up my network, enable an introduction. Sometimes I can, lend my social and professional capital to someone through sponsoring them, meaning opening doors for them, connecting them to opportunities, vouching for them, vouching for their work. When they may not be thought of as for an opportunity because of all the reasons we know. So there's a lot of variety of kinds of privilege. And I think this is available to all of us. And without activating these things, I believe that our progress towards an equitable world is going to be slower, because this to me is the foundation of allyship. It is literally when allies say to me, Jennifer, I don't know what to do. I'm stuck. I can't make a move. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I show them this list and I say, there are lots of things you can do that are objectively within your control and should not be scary things. There are ways to put what we have, our assets, our networks, our capital in play. There are ways to support, to challenge, to interrogate, to question, to champion. There's so many things that are available to us that I don't think need to feel like they're full of drama. So, I'm very impatient for us to, admit to all of this, to own it, and to be accountable for it and to it, because we've been given these things that we have as gifts. And to me, gifts need to be used in the world. So, my call to action is always, what are you doing about these things? Like the second we hang up, what call are you making? What email are you writing? What book are you reading? What conversation are you going to challenge yourself to have? To inquire, if you are, sort of at sea about like, well, what can I activate? I think we need to inventory this in ourselves, and then we need to basically put it all in play. And this is when we talk about power sharing. And when leaders say, Jennifer, there's not enough pie to go around, so I'm going to hoard my piece of pie. And I say, but hold on, there's so much you can share that actually is additive, that is a 1 + 1 = 3 equation, which actually makes you better and transforms you as a leader, teaches you inclusive leadership as you give, as you're generous, as you share. It creates a bigger pie. There is no scarcity here. There are plenty of opportunities available, and we all want to compete on a more equal playing field too. So this is the continuum, and I apologize, I have not been looking at chat like I promised I would, but we'll leave a lot of time for us to go back through. But the last piece here I want to go through, and keep your questions coming because we'll get to them, is the Inclusive Leader Continuum is in my second book, which is called How to Be an Inclusive Leader. And it was out in 2019. And it's a helpful 4-part model. And I want to go through it quickly with 4 stages to it. And it was important to me as a learner that I try to capture what my process has been like and what the stages feel like for me. And also what I observe other people going through, because look, we're all learners. Like I might be viewed as an expert. I don't even know what that means because I'm constantly learning. I just might be like 1 step ahead of everybody. And if I can be helpful, I try to, and that's my job. But so each of the stages I want to go through quickly, and I hope you'll resonate with this, and we'll be sharing something called the Inclusive Leader Assessment with you. It's a free 10-minute assessment that helps you like plot yourself on where you are here, but knowing too that this is not an absolute, that we go forward and back in our journey, that there isn't one answer for all time, but that we can take, some days it feels like we're 1 step forward and 2 steps back or 3 steps back. And other days we sprint forward, and really accomplish something. And then the next day we may realize, oh gosh, I got to go back and learn. I got to go back and learn more because I didn't exactly get that right. So it's a forward and back, and that's hence the sort of circular shape of it. I wanted to not be a linear thing that people get obsessed about the destination, when really I want us to kind of sink into the journey. So the first phase is unaware on the left side of our model. And that is, I don't know what I don't know. I don't care. I am in denial that this is true. Unaware can also be, I'm a good person. I believe in equality as a goal, which is fine. But belief and values is not the same as activation. It's not the same as making something happen in the world. So unaware can house all of those things. And how we come out of unaware is we sort of wake up, right? We begin to realize, oh, shoot, I'm falling behind. Or, gosh, I'm not able to attract and retain the best talent. Like I'm missing things. I'm not leading in a way that is effective. I want to be a better person, but I don't know how. Like I want to continue to grow, but I'm scared. There's a lot of reasons we get stuck in unaware. So if we come through unaware into phase 2, then, which is aware, which is the awakening, the realization that now I know what I don't know. I need to read, I need to listen, I need to observe media, I need to surround myself and put myself in conversations that are unfamiliar to me about my own identities. I need to listen to my language for biases. I need to start to notice and sensitize myself to how I'm showing up. And in Aware, there's a lot to learn, right? And many of us have been, deeply in this phase, I think, over the last couple of years, trying to sort of finally learn what we haven't learned that is going on for other people that we care about. And it can be overwhelming. It's in a lot of information, but it is truly the deep work. And sometimes we do this privately or in like one-on-one situations in those trusted companion relationships we have with like colleagues or family members, and we share what we're learning, but we aren't really activating, we're just deepening our knowledge in this phase about our own iceberg, right? Our understanding of our role in the world. So then though, what we come into next is utilizing what we've learned and taking it, taking the show on the road, so to speak, in active, which is phase 3. And here is where I think we get a little locked up because we want to be perfect. We don't want to make a move unless we have a guarantee somehow. And by the way, there's no guarantees in life, and you don't learn by waiting until it's totally guaranteed that you're going to succeed. But we get stuck in, I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't have all the answers. I can't wrap this up in a nice, neat little bow. And it's just not the point. The point in active is to fail forward. The point is to be resilient and, responsive to feedback we get about how we can do a better job. The point is to seek feedback and assume that we are not going to get many things right. And I really like, meeting that and anticipating that we won't get things right. I really advise leaders to say, make this a part of your dialogue and your discourse, to say, here's where I am in my journey. Here's what I don't understand. Here's what I'm committing to learning. Here's what I am learning. Here's what it's feeling like. Here's where I need help and assistance and partnership. So if we had leaders speaking like that about being an active, I think it would open up a door to a lot of feedback and greater trust. And honestly, so much more a vulnerability that is really appealing, like I said earlier, and will really resonate with our incoming generation of talent. But I think leaders being in certain generations are terrified of this. And I spend a lot of my time trying to equip leaders with the confidence and the courage to navigate active, and also the language with which to show up as we become more public about our journey. Really important, and can be really wobbly and awkward. and yes, there's some risk here, but I would argue that some of us when we take risks with things like this, we are protected by our position in a company. We are protected by our identity. Honestly, we get a lot of runway, I think, more than we think we have, to learn aloud, if you will. And so I would also sort of, when we say like it's too risky, I would interrogate that a bit and challenge ourselves to see, well, what really is the risk? Is that my perception of risk? And also remembering that the people who take the most risk in organizations are those with the most marginalized identities. Every single day, they take the risk of showing up authentically, because they can literally, suffer stereotypes, losing their job, performance, handicapping their performance because of somebody's biases that's, assessing performance. I mean, the risks are great for some of us. And I think it's important to really be honest about what are those risks. So those are there's the fourth arrow. I almost forgot my fourth phase. It's important. Advocate is aspirational. So I think this is kind of something to stretch for. This is, I'm comfortable, I'm confident, I make noise, I know how to challenge systems, I know how to show up, I'm courageous, I'm resilient, I bounce back, I learn, but I don't have like a fragility response to feedback. It's just this sort of unconscious competence of being able to, instinctually know how to be an ally, how to ask for allyship, how to, utilize things under that waterline, and really shine that light for people to follow. And also, by the way, advocates raise others up. They encourage others along the continuum and along their journey. They're mentoring a lot. They're explaining, they're, elucidating, and they're setting a tone where psychological safety is really important, because that sort of underpins a lot of what I've been talking about. So those are the 4 phases. And, as you think about where you are, moving up and back, as I said, it's sort of an iterative journey. From the left to right, we go from, I think, private development and investment to more public expression of these. And as such, the risk goes up, for sure. But I think the reward is really important and the impact is really important, particularly if we have senior roles where so many eyes are on us. It's really critical to be somewhere on this every single day and to be exercising the muscle and building strength in that muscle so that we can hope to in the moments that matter, we can hope to be at the advocate level, and really make sure the right thing happens and the right thing is said, and that we're always learning, both as individual leaders and also as organizations. So I think that's all I brought for you. We may have a couple wrap-up slides and then we can get to the questions, but this is our information again. Tune in the podcast, check out our QR code with all the goodies. We have foundations courses on DEI that you might want to recommend for anybody, even for yourselves. We get a lot of coaches actually in our programs who want to get the 101 and the 201. And then also that inclusive leader assessment is at the bottom bullet there, inclusiveleaderassessment.com. You can use JB Speaks as your code, and it will just give you more information about where you are, but it's definitely not the end all be all answer because only you know where you are in your process, but maybe it will be another ingredient as you put together your plan. And so with that, I would love to come back to our questions, and I haven't even looked, so I don't know if we've got some ones that are popping up, Tammy, that we want to start with, or would you like me to take a spin?
Yeah, I did notice one from Erin. So she described when she was a leader, if she noticed something that was discriminatory, she would approach the individual privately and ask how they were impacted. And they would say, oh, it didn't bother them, even though she felt it was something that almost like should bother them, or she felt it would bother her. So she was wondering, what can we do to be supportive but not unintentionally cause too much to be in question?
Oh, that's such a good question. And there's so many reasons why that person may be responding that way. Think about what that person may have been let down over and over by nobody noticing. And then when somebody notices, what we expect as the person that's like, hey, were you comfortable there? Like, is there something that should be said or follow up? And, how can I support? And they say, oh, it's nothing. Don't worry about it. It happens all the time. There's that moment where you have to kind of wonder, they don't want to ruffle feathers. They don't want to endure the consequences of sharing feedback. They may genuinely not care, but I think that this is where, in my mind, we can't just show up once as allies. Like, I think that somebody being honest with us about how something really lands is something that we earn over time, and it is earned in trust and consistency. So I think if somebody says, don't worry about it, I make a mental note. And I may still follow up, but in an anonymous way. I would still probably use it as a teaching moment. And I might, in other rooms that I'm in, I might say, I was in this meeting, and protecting, of course, because we aren't authorized to share stories, but this was said and it felt to me that it wasn't inclusive language, and I wanted to raise it as something that I think we all need to pay attention to. And I checked in with the individual, and they shared that it was not something that needed follow-up, but as we get more educated, I think we need to carry the torch for these conversations, whether somebody wants us to or not. But there's a difference in using someone's name when they're not comfortable. So I really appreciate the point. And then I would say, so that's one idea, but I do think we've got to take into account the previous experience of that individual and the trust that we may or may not have earned with that individual to really have a truthful answer. Thank you, Tammy.
Perfect. And another question is, do you ever get judged for not being a person of color and being an expert in this arena?
Yes. Sorry about that. Okay, I'm back, I think. Okay, sorry about that. Yes. Not often. And what I don't know is whether people are thinking it, but they wouldn't articulate it, right? And so I have to suspect it's a question. This is why I personally, not just the only reason that I talk about all the parts of my puzzle pieces of identity, but it's one of the reasons I think it's important for me to quickly, and in the first 5 minutes that I spend with people, get to maybe the elephant in the room, which is, why is this blonde woman talking to us about diversity, equity, and inclusion? And, and then I sort of build the case and show the iceberg and talk about the invisible aspects of diversity and come out as LGBTQ. And I try to do that really quickly. In the old keynoting days, I would walk on stage and I would have done all of that within 5 minutes, because I want to head things off at the pass, and I want to challenge people about what is not visible, which is most of our diversity dimensions in my definition are not visible. And I also want to role model being brave about who I am. I mean, I don't always feel like coming out as LGBTQ, believe me, in some audiences where I'm being triggered and I'm looking out on that, to that sea of faces that might identify in a certain way. And I have no idea how this is going to be perceived. But I do it anyway. And so I try to role model what it sounds like to identify, different pieces that in some people's minds may be contradictory, but I don't view them as contradictory. I view them as additive. I view them as all these parts of myself. And honestly, just trying to role model how to talk about privileges in a more inclusive way is just so important. And so my call to action, honestly, these days is for allyship, which is interesting coming from an LGBTQ plus woman, right? Who needs male allies, who needs straight allies to sometimes check in with me about impact, right? Or to offer to be helpful. And so I think that we need to, I like to say usualize instead of normalize. I think we need to usualize how we talk about this Rubik's Cube of our identity and take privilege out of the white and male bucket where it's not helpful, and say, we each of us can practice 360-degree allyship, which to me means I can simultaneously be marginalized in certain aspects, and I can also be activating things that I have been given, that I have accomplished, that I have access to. And that seems to, I think, shift the discussion. But I acknowledge that there are some questions about who can do the work right now, and whether or not we need more voices of certain identities doing the work. My answer to that is the work is so enormous that I don't believe we can sacrifice any voices, any messengers in any package. That is my short answer. It is enormous. There's enough to go around. It's complex. And by the way, maybe looking this way and identifying the way I do means that I can get into a room and be heard in a certain way. And that somebody else in my position that identifies differently than I do may be really, really tired and fatigued, and I may not be. I may be able to say, hey, lean on me to do this. I'll take care of this. Let me go first. Let me go into that. I think sometimes I'm like the head bowling pin and I absorb the shock of the bowling ball. And we switch places, we as the bowling pins, to continue on this metaphor, like sometimes you're in front, sometimes I'm in front. It feels like, how geese fly and they switch the leader, well, couldn't we work this way? Like, couldn't we partner together to really leverage what we all can contribute at the right moments when we need each other most? Could we put the one who's refreshed and had a break out in the front, and could we treat this as a partnership? And I think many hands make light work. And I think if we looked at this differently, we could really activate the resources around us differently and get there faster and get there with less sort of collateral fatigue, because the fatigue is real, particularly for a lot of us that have been pushing really hard for a really long time, and feeling like there's no end in sight, and feeling like allies have yet to really wake up and engage. So let's show something different. Like, let's activate our voices and get into that flock, right? And say, hey, whenever we're ready for me to fly in the front position, I'm ready. I've done my homework. I'm working the steps. I'm prepared. I'm equipped. And I'm, ready to contribute that energy.
Awesome. Questions coming in, Jennifer.
Okay.
Next one is, how do we create conversations for people at phase 3 so they can help each other develop language and patterns to be visible?
Oh, phase 3. So phase 3 is active. How can we have more conversations? Yeah, it is so much about language at phase 3. I often get the question, like, how do I begin? Like, how do I start this conversation? It feels really awkward. Maybe I have a lot of privileges and I don't, of identity, right? Or earned or unearned. And maybe I don't carry some of the lived experiences or any of the lived experiences that we've put so much of a focus on, right, that are underrepresented. And I think the language I used earlier around, feel free to take that iceberg or any iceberg model. Honestly, it's all over the internet. I mean, not mine per se, but that model is a great like warm up exercise to begin to get to know our teams, to begin to pick something that, we think may be relevant and important in the future as leaders. What part of me have I've never really shared, I've never really identified, I've never verbalized. How do I storytell about that? Like, how do I practice what we talk about by, lowering my waterline and being vulnerable, just like we're asking other people to be? How do I open up that door with, a share by me versus only asking questions of others? I think too, we put people on the spot a lot, because we think, and listening is so important. And so I don't want to diminish the importance of good questions and opening that door and saying, I really want to talk about this. I want to talk about, inclusion on our team. I want to talk about what belonging means to you. But we also need to share what it means to us. We also need to share what's true for us and where we're learning and where we don't have the answers as well. And particularly for leaders, it's very important to do that, to set the tone and to go first. I think leaders often go first. It's sort of don't, ask me to participate in a discussion that you're not really participating in. And so I think that work needs to happen, but we need to be careful when we go first that we don't dominate discussions, because this moment isn't really about us. It is about the voices and the stories and the lived experiences that have not been center stage. And that's what we need to be driven by, what we hear and what we learn from really excellent questions and listening and showing up over and over again and building the trust we were talking about earlier, where somebody will actually tell you the truth after you ask 5 times. What that sounds like is, to keep checking in. And by the way, gender non-binary, I'll just use an example again of gender identity and gender expression. I still have friends who are coming into their own identity. They're still coming to an understanding of how they identify. I just had a friend on social media say, I came out as non-binary first because that was my understanding of how I identify. And now I'm coming out again as trans. So people are in flux. People are still they are evolving. And so checking in to understand what pronouns should we be using with each other can actually change. But we need to build trust with people so that they will come to us and say, because you've been so supportive, I want to tell you my news. I want to tell you that instead of they them pronouns, I'm going to be identifying with he him pronouns now. And you say, thank you, I will make that happen. And I will back you up, and I will assure that you are addressed in that way. So we're all evolving. And I think that we earn this over time. And I want to warn us against well, I tried and I didn't get the right response. I tried and I didn't get anything. This is not about immediate reward. This is not about immediate results. It is a practice. It is applied. It is consistent. And it means showing up and then building the trust so that we can eventually get to more honest, transparent conversations where we feel that we can have those and bad things won't happen. But I think a lot of us are still dealing with trauma from how things have been handled in the past and how we haven't been supported in the past. And that may be a really good thing to inquire about if you're wondering about language, to say, tell me about your experiences of belonging on different teams with different leaders, with different managers and different organizations. What has that sounded like? What has that felt like? And what can we do to make sure you're thriving here? And remember, have that conversation with everyone. We can't just have it with our employees that look diverse or seem to identify in certain places, because again, so much is invisible. If you checked in with me and you didn't know I was LGBTQ, maybe I trust you enough to come out to you and really answer that question honestly, but you have to earn that with me, So when some people say I feel tokenized, I think that's what they mean. It's like people call them up, when there's another police shooting and sort of, once in a while, and say, well, I wanted to check in, how are you? And it's like, but hold on, we haven't been in this conversation. And the goal, I think, is to be in the conversation and in the relationship. with folks. And if you don't have those kinds of relationships with a lot of diverse identities in your networks, I would also encourage all of us to really strive to diversify our go-to folks, our friends, our community members, our team members, our go-to people. I know it's hard, but like to have those relationships where we've been pouring into them and they've been mutually so satisfying. Those really, when the rubber hits the road, those relationships are really important, because then at that point you can confer with somebody and say, I'm so upset about what happened today in the news. How are you? And you're not going to get the, oh, I'm fine. You're going to get the, I really need to take a mental health day because I've been crying for 24 hours. You're going to get that, but you can't snap your fingers and ask that for that. It just doesn't happen that way. So thanks so much for the question.
Yeah, we have lots more, Jennifer. So just trying to select these. I guess we'll go to a team coaching question. When there's leaders in all four phases, there's a lot of impatience for those in stage one, especially. What approach do you recommend for helping leaders at different phases in a team coaching scenario to get into one vision and agreement regarding accountability on inclusive leadership?
Welcome to my world. It's like every executive team. And if we know where everybody is and we have, we can maybe even share our inclusive leader assessments, to me, that would be really amazing, because to me, that would be a signal of a team that trusts each other about where we are and where we're not. And also forgives each other about where we are if we're in early stages. Look, like I might have a kid with a disability, and, I have become an advocate for, first her or them or he, him, and also then becoming an advocate for a whole community as an ally, right? As a parent. So, I had a leg up because I was thrown into the deep end with as a caregiver of a loved one. But others of us haven't had to, grapple with something and had to get on this continuum and start our learning and accelerate it. Maybe we haven't had the exposure. Maybe we haven't, had the lived experience. So I think first of all, there's grace that's needed, is I think what I'm saying. And then to me, what really matters is like, why are we where we are? I think that how I deal with folks in unaware coming into aware is, we awaken for so many different reasons and with so many different tools, whether it's the business case, whether it's data, whether it's ego, whether it's, I want to be an effective leader in the future and I'm fearing that I'm falling behind and I don't have the skills. Whether it's, it could be, I don't believe in this and I don't agree with it. And that's that's a challenge. If you've got some of that on your team, I would worry for that person, because to me, this moment is not about agree, disagree. It's about good leadership, and good leadership is all about followership. And also good leadership is about resonating and responding to, with respect, a diversifying talent base and a diversifying customer base. Like, it's pretty simple. This isn't necessarily doesn't need to be a moral choice. It is a strategic choice to be a welcoming workplace where everyone can thrive and deal with as little stereotyping and bias as possible, because that's when we can get creative, right? If we're buried under problems with psychological safety, we cannot do our best work. We cannot be productive. We cannot create. We don't trust our colleagues to create together, et cetera. So I think to me, the reason matters a lot. And there are certain reasons I can do a lot with, and there's other reasons that are trickier to navigate, right? The disagree, agree binary is one that's difficult. Religious issues is difficult. But I would tackle that in the way I just described. But if people are just in apathy, I think that's easier to me. It's a conversation around, well, hold on, like, so, the rationale of we have all these people who are traditionally underrepresented in our organization, in the ERGs, et cetera, doing all this work to change the culture. But we as leaders aren't meaningfully involved. We're not concretely contributing to this on a personal level, not just waiting for HR to do it, not just outsourcing it to D&I, but we as individuals. And I think I'm hoping waking up to, and my book is really good, by the way, executive teams love How to Be an Inclusive Leader, the second book, not the latest one I just came out with, although that's good too, but it's not so much about leadership. The second book, How to Be an Inclusive Leader, is a wonderful read for executives to read, to discuss, to go through chapter by chapter, and to create some safety and a container and a structure wherein an executive can raise their hand and say, I really don't understand this, or I'm just realizing I'm very biased, or I grew up in a very homogeneous place and I never had exposure to all of this. And now I'm realizing that I don't have competence around it. If we could generate that dialogue and you have somebody, another executive say, this is so helpful. Like now we know where we are and we can support each other, mentor each other. We can, we can be a safe space for each other to have these conversations. Ideally, a team supports itself in learning and growing. Ideally, there is a confidentiality there on executive teams and leadership teams where, we can be honest about what we need to learn and we can support each other in our learning because we're going to be in different places. I mean, how great is that actually, that we can be doing the work that we expect and need the whole organization to be going through. If we were all aligned, of course, that would be great too, but that's never the case. So I would encourage transparency, use that iceberg, use the inclusive leader assessment, use the book, have the conversation, have a book club on the executive team, maybe have a facilitator externally. If I can be helpful, I do a lot of that kind of stuff, but the container needs to be built and then ideally facilitated. And, if it can be honest, I think that's when we can really start to roll up our sleeves and support each other and practice what we preach, and what it sounds like is, this is where it might be interesting, have some ground rules for feedback on the executive team. So if I hear, I'm the only LGBTQ person on the team, and I hear a phrase that somebody uses, maybe a microaggression that they don't realize, what should I do next? And I think that if we speak about together, what do we want to do when we need to correct each other? We need to elaborate on somebody's language. If we need to give someone feedback and you can work that out. I think calling in someone to a private conversation after the fact is really lovely so that, but sometimes a conversation in the moment where it's sort of a timeout to make a point, if there's a way to do that with grace and kindness and there's trust in the room, it can be a tremendous learning laboratory for executives. So again, I just said a whole lot. I hope there's some good ideas in there that you can put into practice. Thanks, Tammy. Whew.
And Jennifer, yeah, we've only got a few minutes left. What are the basic skills, competencies coaches need to coach for inclusive leadership?
Yeah, so coaching on this topic versus consulting, I see a question here. It's tricky. I'll tell you, we talked about this, Tammy, that coaching is so reflective and kind of like keeping ourselves out of the frame and like leading the horse to water. But I think my answer with this topic is that sometimes we do need to move into training mode and into advising mode. Out of, sometimes I hear it referred to as inquiry versus advocacy. And I don't know if some of you use that paradigm, but I'm not sure this topic is difficult to coach in the sort of pure sense around if people don't know what they don't know. What we can do is equip with resources. What we can do is establish common frameworks. What we can do is do our own work as coaches so that when that person is ready to ask the questions and work through some things that we may be able to support them. But I don't know, honestly. I wish somebody would do a whole research project on true coaching for DEI behaviors, because I don't know how you get some of these things across without saying, hey, this is an article that's really considered to be kind of very important for inclusive leadership. It's something I'd recommend you read and think about how it reflects on your leadership. Like, I think we've got to have a little bit more of a hand. And that's my answer. I apologize if I'm breaking coaching orthodoxy. I know that it's very strict. It's a reason why I decided not to be a coach purely, although I was very interested in it. I felt more like a teacher. And I just wanted so much to get resources into people's hands and be able to answer some questions so that people could move more quickly. But it's a philosophical question, so I really appreciate the question.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I totally see and we talked about this, like like you
Yeah.
said, Jennifer, on the challenge with that. But us being equipped, knowing the language, the terminology, recognizing when someone is in need of kind of like here, we're at the stage now in the coaching conversation where I might suggest some
Right.
advice uh, in the sense of here's some resources if you're
Yeah.
interested. No
Yes.
obligation. It's
Tammy,
that,
can I make one more point too?
yeah.
If you all believe that somebody's struggling with microaggressions and being stereotyped, right? And the effects of identity, I would so want you to, sometimes they don't even know that that's what's going on, you know? So in the coaching relationship, being prepared to recognize something when you see it happening, and then understanding that this person may have never named this. So that may be what's going on. And so you need to deepen your knowledge so you know what you're looking at and you know what you're hearing, but you can't make assumptions, right? And so how does a coach lovingly kind of open up that door to kind of lead to pull that out of somebody so that they can see it and say, oh my goodness, you're right. I didn't understand I'm not alone in what I'm going through. And I think that if you can somehow, through your beautiful coaching techniques, bring somebody to a place where they can see themselves in the context of the system and understand the research that has been done, that they're not alone, that their experience isn't solitary, and that they're not, and that there's ways to then, knowing that, strategically kind of move through this system. I think that would be so my wish for all of you, if you could somehow enable that. Feeling seen in the relationship with you all as the coach is so, could be a first time for people, and you could be the most trusted relationship that they have, to explore this. So I just also want to encourage you to figure out a way to do that while still practicing your craft, which is so beautiful in the way that you do it.
That's awesome, Jennifer. We're at time. I can't believe that hour went by so quickly.
I know.
That's amazing. But getting lots of love for you in the chat, and we will be the chapters will be making the slides available for people.
Mhm.
So as a reminder. And Jennifer, I can't thank you enough for taking your time out to talk with us today on this topic. It's always an interesting topic, and people are always interested in it. So
Yes.
many, many, many thanks to you.
Thank you so much, everybody. Appreciate you and the work you do. Thank you. Keep it up.
Thank you so much, Jennifer.
Thank you.
And thank you, everybody, for attending and joining us today.
Have a wonderful holiday season.
Take care, everybody.
Okay. A few people that didn't see the time correctly.
The beauty of Atlantic and Eastern time zones
Mhm.
and Newfoundland and Labrador time zone.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a few
I think there's-
people in the
Yeah. it's
waiting
still a few-
room.
There's still a few people that are connected.
Uh,
I think there's a couple that are still connected on. Maybe they had to leave their computer or something.
we can remove them.
You can probably stop the recording now, though.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you for the reminder.